large, ugly bags of mostly water. Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Home Soil, which is episode 17 of season 1 of Star Trek Next Generation. This video is part of a series of videos where I review every episode of Star Trek Next Generation, one episode at a time. In this video I cover the episode Home Soil. So Home Soil is the episode where the Enterprise visits a terraforming station where they are greeted not very friendly by the director, who basically just wants them to get away. And then while they're down there investigating the place, someone of the workers is killed. So then they deem it a murder and they investigate who was responsible for killing this worker, and they find out that it's actually a silicon life form that lived in that planet, which they thought was lifeless, but they didn't recognize as a life form. They killed the worker in order to stop them from killing them, because they were, during their work of terraforming, they were about to wipe out the whole race. And so Picard, before he recognizes that it's a life form, beams it aboard the ship for study, and then the life form tries to destroy the Enterprise and declares war on Picard, but Picard realizes that they need light in order to function, so they just turn off the lights in the room that they're in, and so they declare peace and they beam the life forms back down to the planet to live in peace. So, you know how the Naked Now is, just a redone of Naked Time, and it's called, Naked Now. They just changed the word time to now, because it's basically the exact same concept. They're basically just redoing an original series episode from Next Generation Times, but it's the same exact concept. It's pretty much the same plot. A lot of things are very similar, so they just called it, instead of calling it the Naked Time, they called it the Naked Now, to sort of recognized as basically just doing what's already been done before. So in that same vein, I believe this episode should have been called The Devil in the Sand, or something along those lines, because this is basically doing the same thing, but that The Devil in the Dark did. And now there's some differences, obviously, but it's so similar. In fact, it's funny, I watched a bunch of reviews of this episode. Nobody brought up, how this is basically just redoing The Devil in the Dark, which shocked me. People bring that up with Unnatural Selection, how that's similar to the original series episode, The Deadly Years, but I actually think those episodes are totally different. I mean, they're similar because they're doing the same exact concept of there's the disease that makes you grow old rapidly, but that's where the similarities end. And so I wouldn't even compare those. I mean, I would compare the two episodes, but I wouldn't say that it's a remake of The Deadly Years the way that The Naked Now is a remake of The Naked Time. But I would say that this is a remake of The Devil in the Dark, because you have these people working on the planet that think they're just, they're oblivious to the fact that there's a silicon life form. By the way, it's a silicon life form in both episodes, Devil in the Dark and Home Soil. It's both a silicon life form. Now, the life forms are very different, to be fair, but they're both silicon based, which in both cases, in both episodes, they say, oh, there's no such thing as silicon life form. You can't have inorganic life forms. That's ridiculous. They say that in both episodes. Anyway, so there's these workers on the planet that are Federation citizens working for various things, and then they start getting killed off, and they find out that it's this, hostile life form that they just want to kill, but then they realize that it's actually an intelligent life that they had been killing by doing their work, and they were not aware of it, so this life form is just fighting back. Come on, it's the same fucking episode. I should have called this The Devil in the Sand, and I'm amazed more people don't bring this up. Now, there are some key differences to be, I'm not saying they're not. There obviously are, but that just what I just described is way too similar than it should be, and I think it's way more similar than, say, Unnatural Selection is to The Deadly Years. And so if you're gonna say it's a remake of the original series episode, this is a clear example. In fact, I think I did a top 10 video before where I count down the top 10 Star Trek episodes that ripped off other Star Trek episodes, and this was definitely on that top 10. Because it is basically just redoing the plot from The Devil in the Dark. And again, this shows how it illustrates the tension in the writer's room in season 1, and also how a lot of the writers were from the original series or had that original series sort of mindset. And so I think that's why we get an episode like this. But anyway, so there's some differences. Obviously, the key differences is that in The Devil in the Dark, they thought it was a monster going around killing their people. In this episode, they didn't even realize. They thought it was another person who was killing the people. And there was only one person that died in this episode, where The Devil in the Dark was a whole bunch of people. And also, the person didn't die until after the Enterprise got there, whereas in The Devil in the Dark, the whole reason the Enterprise went there is because people were getting killed. And the life form, the Horta, in The Devil in the Dark was sort of a lot more peaceful. And once they communicated with Kirk or Spock what was actually happening, it agreed for peace, and it was just protecting its young, and it didn't, mean to be hostile. It was just defending itself. And once Kirk and Spock realized that, they helped this, and they formed an alliance. And in fact, at the end of the episode, the Federation citizens end up staying on the planet and mining the planet, and the Horta actually helped them do it. Whereas in the home soil, this species was a lot more hostile, and once they found out that it was an intelligent species, this species didn't care and had already declared war on it. And at the end, they make an uneasy truce where, Picard beams it back to the planet and leaves them alone. And I think the implication is that the Federation and the humans are staying far away from that planet. I think Picard even said he's going to put a quarantine on the planet so no one else goes there. Which is different from The Devil in the Dark. So there are some key differences, but I think it's way too similar. Way too similar. Now, it's funny because I watched someone else talk about this episode in terms of the Enterprise went there, the guy told them to go away, they didn't listen to him and beamed down anyway, and then they ended up disrupting their whole entire operation and fucking everything up, which is funny, but I think is an unfair assessment to this episode, because had the Enterprise not showed up, that guy still would have gotten killed. In fact, they would have never figured out what was going on, so they all probably would have died. So, in fact, the Enterprise showing up was a good thing, because those micro-brain, whatever, would have probably easily killed all those terraformers there. If it wasn't for the Enterprise there to beam it aboard and finally communicate with it and work out a truce, then I think those terraformers would have ultimately been fucked. That's how I say it. And it's not like the microbrain, or what, I think that's such a stupid name though, but the silicon life form, it's not like they wouldn't have killed those terraformers anyway. Of course they would have. The terraformers were about to wipe out their entire race, their entire species. Of course they would have fought back and killed them all. So, and plus they still seem determined to do it. Now, there is sort of a disconnect in terms of writing, because when Picard first shows up to the planet, the director of the terraforming outfit is kind of like, "What are you doing here? Go away!" And he's very grumpy, and Troy's like, "He's hiding something. He's desperately hiding something. He's getting very panicky," and that's what causes Picard to send down an away team. He's like, "I'm going to send down an away team whether you like it or not," and the guy's like, "Fine, whatever." And And so it makes it very clear that he's freaked out and that he's hiding something. But later, what we find out that he's hiding is actually not that big of a deal. Like, because he insists that he didn't know about the life form, and I take him at his word. I think he's being completely honest. In fact, when Picard accuses him of murder, he, like, freaks out, and he's like, I create life, I don't take it. And he seemed highly offended, too. So I take him at his word that he had no idea that he was killing a life form, and had he known, he would have stopped instantly. But we do know, however, that they did see weird things of light in the planet, like him and that other dude. And they thought it was strange, but they decided not to tell anyone. He says at the time he didn't think much of it. And again, I take him at his word. Now, the microbrain, again, I hate that name, but the microbrain later claims that it was them trying to communicate with them, like they were making geometric shapes and whatnot, and saying, we try to tell you to stop and you do not listen. So it was clear that they were trying to get the terraformers to stop, but they didn't pick up on it. And I buy that they didn't pick up on it. And he didn't really get it. Now, partly, I think, well, one main thing, and this is what the director guy keeps insisting over and over again, is like, we were assured that this planet was lifeless. So, I think that's what he believed, and I think that's why he dismissed as, well, it can't possibly be life trying to communicate with us, just random lights, and we're just seeing what we want to see. We're seeing patterns when they're not really patterns there, which I think is a fair thing for someone to tell themselves. But the fact that he, like, didn't want to tell any of the other scientists there does make it a tinge nefarious. But I don't think it kind of explains why he was so freaked out and grumpy when Picard showed up. Now, him being grumpy because Picard was disrupting their timetable, I mean, that's understandable. But bear in mind, it wasn't just him being grumpy. Troy kept saying over and over again, he's hiding something. He's desperately hiding something. What is he hiding? That they saw these random lights that he himself thinks is not, doesn't really mean anything and just random lights? Or, I don't know. So, that I don't think this quite matches up. I mean, you could say that maybe he's lying when he said that he knew it wasn't, or thought it wasn't a life form, that he assumed it was, that he actually reasoned it might be a life form, but wanted to ignore it. And that's what he was trying to hide from Picard. But I think, again, that doesn't quite match up. Because, again, he seems to be very insistent that the planet was lifeless. And he seems very, like, upset about the fact when he finds out that there was, in fact, a life. In fact, at first he's in complete denial. When Picard does inform him it's a life form, he's like, no way, there's no such thing. There's no way there's life on that planet. And then when he finds out that it was alive, he seems that he feels guilty and like he did the wrong thing. So I don't think that matches up to him lying. I think it's very clear that he did not know it was a life form. In which case, what is he hiding? Because that's the whole thing. That's the whole reason why Picard sends Riker and the away team down to the planet, because Troy is insisting he's hiding something. And it seems weird that it's very serendipitous that the Enterprise just so happens to come by for an unscheduled visit, an unwelcome visit at the right time, right before that other guy was about to get killed. Now then there's the scene where Data is, after the guy got killed, Data's studying the laser drill that killed him, and of course it tries to kill Data, and he outsmarts it and destroys it, and I think that's a really cool scene. I like it. And then that other guy was like, oh, that's a lifetime's work destroyed. You destroyed it all. And I think this is where the other reviewer was coming from when they said the Enterprise showed up and was just fucking everything up. But mind you, like, as I said, had the Enterprise not showed up, they'd all be dead. And they're going to have to leave that planet anyway. Their terraforming project is scrapped. So it actually, ultimately, in the big picture, the big scheme of things, doesn't make one iota of a difference that Data destroyed that laser drill, because they ain't going to do more terraforming in that planet regardless. And I suppose they're probably going to update their scouting protocols to be a bit more stringent when they determine a planet to be lifeless. And then you had that one scientist. It's really weird. I thought it was really jarring how when the Enterprise first showed up, you had the director guy being grumpy ass. And then they beamed down to the planet, and you had this other scientist who was so fucking friendly. It's like, oh, well, here we go. So great to see you here. Let me take you around the tour. I don't know. I kind of don't buy this character, because it seems like they don't get visitors and they don't really do tours, and it seems more likely that they would just be, grumpy scientists. Maybe she's getting a bit stir crazy, being the only woman of those three dudes who are all grumpy. Maybe that would make sense, and she's obviously an extrovert and someone who's very caring, and so when she actually sees new people, she's like, ah! But, I still found that a little bit jarring in tone, but it's, not that big of a deal. But I did like how later, when they found out it was a life form, she was the one who was most affected by it, and she was crying. She's like, oh my God, I can't believe we're killing an actual life form, and how guilt-ridden she is. So I think that really played to the effectiveness of the episode. But we get this really weird scene where apparently Picard and Riker and Troy are talking about the situation and wanting to get more information from the scientists, and so they say, oh, maybe we can ask her, that one woman, for more information. Troy says to Riker something of the fact, oh, maybe you will have better luck getting information out of her. Ding! It's like, what? I mean, I think some people are implying more than what's here. I think some people took that as she's telling Riker to go seduce her. I don't get that. I think it's more of she would be more comfortable with Riker. And it would have something to do with his charm. And the fact that she would be attracted to him, but I think she's not telling him to go sleep with her. She's just knowing that she's going to open up a bit more to him, because she would feel more comfortable. That's all I took it as, but it's still a bit weird and kind of unprofessional to suggest that. And again, that has this Roddenberry style of writing that's throughout season 1, where they were trying to make Riker another, womanizer, just like Kirk was. And I mean, some of this carries on in future seasons. I'm thinking of Yuta, and then Soren from the Outcast. Yuta was from the Vengeance Factor, and I think there's a few other examples. But still, they definitely chilled it back. They chilled out. They held it back, laid it back a bit. They didn't lay it on so thick as they did in the first season when Roddenberry was in charge. I think they took it back a step. Riker's like being a womanizer thing, which is good. I mean, he was still definitely throughout the whole season or the whole series, but still they just. Yeah, like the whole Troy telling Riker to you would have more luck getting information. Like that just doesn't seem right. Anyway, yeah, I like Crusher in this episode. How she, is very determined, very professional. When that life form, starts freaking out and acting up, and she's like, evacuate the lab, and they're just standing around talking. And she's like, no, I said evacuate the freaking lab. and then they leave. But it does seem kind of easy. Like the solution for this is just to turn down the lights. I mean, That seems way too easy. And the other thing is, why didn't they just do that before? It seemed like it took them too long to figure out that, oh, there's a beam of light every time it transports. Maybe it needs light. I mean, I feel like you kind of should have figured that out before. And also the whole thing with the micro brain being like, war is now on with you. It seems kind of illogical. It seems like it's just there as plot contrivance so they can have a threat of the week. It seems like what does it hope to accomplish by destroying the Enterprise? It itself will be destroyed. Or maybe he will use his powers to beam back down before the Enterprise is destroyed. I don't know. But still, it doesn't seem very smart. And it seems like its ultimate goal should be to go back down to the planet for, the Federation to go away. Now, I granted why it might be a bit distrustful when Picard says we will leave, we never meant to do this, but to react by going, war is now on with you, I think is, I don't know. I don't quite buy it. And then at the end we had that silly line. It's very reminiscent of the original series where it was like, you are too primitive, come back in 1,000 years maybe. I think they said this exact line several times in the original series. And I was like, yeah, that's stupid. I'm sorry. Anyway. So that's pretty much all I have to say about this particular episode. So now I would like to thank my Patreon supporters for supporting me on Patreon. Is incredibly helpful, very much appreciated. Does help me continue with this channel. And yeah, it's just very humbling. So anyway, we have Francisco, Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky, Matty Jester, Joel Valls, Alessandro Miguelcio, Norman Buckwald, Stephen Kennedy, Brenton Berg, Allison Fordyce, and Brandon Neal Howells. Thank you all so very, very much for your support. So we have a couple comments from this episode. First comment is from Norman Buckwald that says a TOS style episode with an interesting premise, but I've seen it done better in other episodes where sentient life is pronounced. Most recently, the horror themed episode in this season's Strange New Worlds. It's also the trope of some colony or scientific group that doesn't want Starfleet investigating them, and this is definitely one of the lesser ones, although that bags of water remark sounds so TOS/Twilight Zone 60s eeriness. 4 bags of water out of 10. I didn't think about that new episode, the Stranger Worlds episode with the horror, because when that episode came out, I thought it was very reminiscent of a lot of old other Star Trek episodes. Because in that episode, it was similar. They were like mining deuterium in this nebula, and they didn't realize they were wiping out this alien, and the aliens were trying hard to communicate them. That was a much better episode, by the way, but I remember when I first saw it, I thought that it's doing what's been done tons and tons of time before in Star Trek, but it's doing it well, which is a good point, because this episode is not doing it well. And like that episode reminded me of multiple episodes where this one is very specifically Devil in the Dark, I think. But yeah, that's just me. So next comment is from Brandon Neal Howells, who says, another failed attempt at a TOS episode. Seems like no one remembers that the Hoarder was a silicon-based life form. Kurt Mandel is so hostile that it's no surprise that he and Bjorn know more than they're telling. The terraformers have no protective clothing at all, which is idiotic. The aliens themselves are so arrogant that I have no empathy for them. Fuck off and come back when you're more enlightened. Does anyone else remember the Metrons from Arena? Why is Troy telling Picard how evasive Mandel is while Mandy is on screen and listening? 3 Worfs telling the computer, "I wasn't talking to you," out of 10. Yeah, that was quite a silly moment when Worf turns to the computer and goes, "I wasn't talking to you." I think actually Crusher does that later on in the episode Remember Me as well. But anyway, yeah, the Kurt Mendel, he and Bjorn know that about the lights thingies, but it's still, to me, it doesn't jive that he would be so drastically trying to hide something. I don't know. For me, that just doesn't add up. And yes, the aliens themselves are in fact very arrogant. "Ugly bags of mostly water. War is now with you." Yeah, it does make you... It definitely doesn't work as well as The Devil in the Dark in getting you sympathy for these life forms. Yeah, no one remembers that the Hoarder is a silicon-based life form because they're like, "What?" And this is what I talked about, how it's the same thing in both episodes where both times people are like, "What? There's no such thing as a silicon-based life form." In fact, another reviewer I watched pointed out that Geordi was having a conversation with Data, and they were talking about the possibility of the glowing thingy being a life form, and Geordi is like, "What? But it's not organic. It's an inorganic life form," and Geordi says this to Data, who is not an organic life form. But anyway, yeah, so this episode was quite sloppy indeed. So my rating for Home Soil out of 10 is going to be a 4 poor. Maybe I'm being generous by giving it a 4 and not a 3, but it's not like, to me, it's not like highly offensive. It's not as terrible as some of these first season episodes are. It's not like, to me, this is more of a middling, down the road, forgettable episode rather than something that really sucks, like Lonely Amongst Us or Code of Honor or something like that. It's kind of just... Yeah, one of those forgettable later first season episodes that I just skip over every time and it's not terrible. It's not something I gawk at this be like, this totally sucks, because they are redoing The Devil in the Dark. But I mean, some of the characters are interesting. The director guy was interesting. The woman who was like very friendly was interesting, and the micro brain. I mean, it is. You gotta argue. You can't argue that it's definitely memorable when he says, "Ugly bags of mostly water," and the concept is original. It is a bit different than the Hoarder because it's more like computer cells forming together and growing. So there are some interesting things to latch onto in this episode, but ultimately, it's not good. It's not very original. Even though it's not terrible, it's still just forgettable and just there. So that is it for my review of Home Soil. Let's see if I can look at what's coming up next on my channel. Let's see. So this Monday I'm actually going to take a break from doing TNG, and I'm going to do a Better Call Saul Season 6 episode by episode review, continuing a series I started over a year ago, or finally concluding it, I should say. And then Wednesday covering the 3rd episode of Ahsoka, and then Saturday we'll be back with the TNG review with Coming of Age, and then the following Monday another TNG review with Heart of Glory. So that's what's coming up on my channel. Be sure to subscribe so you can check all that out, and thanks so much for watching.